Hey Latin 1, as promised, a future perfect tense video right after the one that I just did on pluperfects. And of course, maybe you're watching these right next to each other, or maybe not. That's the magic of video. You can watch it anytime. Maybe this is the first verb video of mine you've ever watched. If that's true, you should go back and watch the others. You need to know your verbs. Especially because this is actually the last tense that you need to know. After this, there's no more verb videos. That's actually not true. There's more things to know about verbs. But there aren't any more tenses. So it's the last verb video for a good long while. Yeah, there are 6 tenses in Latin. And there's the 3 in the present system that we already learned about. Present, imperfect, and future. And then there's the 3 in the perfect system. Perfect that we did, pluperfect that we did, and now future perfect. Okay? So to build on what I was talking about in the other videos on the perfect and the pluperfect, the future perfect as part of the perfect system is another tense that represents completion, completed action. But whereas the whereas the perfect tense are things that are completed before now, and the pluperfect tense are things that are completed in the past before other things that happened in the past, the future perfect are things that will have been completed at some point before other things in the future. That really is a mouthful. I promise it does make sense. If you heard that and just thought that's not real, I promise it is. But it also probably feels kind of unfamiliar because while we do have this in English, we don't use it very often in English. As you can see there, the way you do this is you translate it with a will have. When you want to form the future perfect in English, that's what you say. You say will and have. Will because it's future, but also have because it is also perfect. It is future and perfect. It is both of those things. It hasn't happened yet, but it is still expressing that it will have been completed. Now, we don't use this in English simply because we don't often need to say this in English. It is not a normal thing that you're going to have to worry about very often. The Romans don't use it very much either, and in English we use it even less. So it probably will feel real unfamiliar. But in terms of what the verb forms look like, if you have your previous tenses and verb forms down pretty well, learning what a future perfect looks like in Latin is actually not very hard. I still have the pluperfect forms up from just for what was me a couple of minutes ago. And I have the future perfect ones right next to it, and just look how similar they are. Right? We go from eram to ero, eras to eris, erat to erit. Basically, for the most part, we're just replacing A's with I's. Basically, I know there's an O there, not an I, but otherwise, we're just replacing A's with I's. And you might also recognize that these future perfect forms have endings that look almost identical to the future form of sum, which is really not a surprise when you consider that our pluperfect had endings that look like the imperfect of sum. Well, the future of sum is the ending for the future perfect, which again is to say, if you have not memorized those forms of sum like I suggested, you must memorize those forms of sum. It is, number one, super crucially important because it is in and of itself a super common verb, but number two, it's also really important you memorize it because it ends up getting used in other things, like as endings for the pluperfect and future perfect, and it's actually going to get used for some other things that we learn about in Latin too as well. So that's why I ever so heavily emphasize why it's important to learn sum, all right, in all of its forms. In any case, the way you would translate this, as you can see here on this table, is I will have demanded, you will have demanded, he, she, it will have demanded, we will have demanded, etc. It's probably going to feel real awkward because that's a lot of helping verbs to stack up in front of whatever you're trying to say. But again, you're not going to use it that often. In truth, I wish that we used it never because then I wouldn't have to teach it and you wouldn't have to learn it. But the Romans do in fact use it sometimes. And so we have to know it just in case it shows up because it will show up sometimes, but it will show up less than like every other tense. It will show up less than the rest of the perfect system. It'll show up less than anything in the present system. So if you need an example of why you would need to say that something will have been done, that the reason why you would need to have completion at some point in the future could be a sentence like this one. All right? Antequam a paladoras parare cibum es poteret. Aurelia duci ad cubiculum poposceret. And you can see I've got my future perfect verb underlined over here. But it's not the only verb in the sentence. There's a future tense verb in the sentence as well. I guess theoretically you could have a sentence where you only had a future perfect tense verb, but I didn't bother even trying to write an example for that because there's just no reason to do that. Even though you could, and it would arguably be grammatically correct, you would just never need to say that. It doesn't make any sense. So in this sentence, what it says is, before Apollodorus will be able to prepare food for them, Aurelia will have demanded to be led to her room. Of course, this is a throwback to one of those chapters we read recently from the textbook. But I've reframed it into the future instead of the past. So we've got this idea that will happen in the future. He will be able to prepare them food, but before that, this other thing will have happened. This ends up getting completed before this other action in the future. All right? And that's the difference here. This will have happened before this one. And this is also a really good example of a sentence where you actually need to say will have. Before he will be able, she will have demanded. Okay? And the reason I even point out that this is a really good example of when you actually need to say will have is because, like I said, the Romans don't use this very much, and in English we use this even less. In a lot of the sentences that you actually see with a future perfect, even though I'm telling you that you translate the future perfect with the will have, in a lot of the sentences you're not really going to use the will have. You could translate it in a way that we say in English pretty easily and ignore the will have, and your sentence will still make sense. Like in this one. This sentence says, my cats will bite my feet when I will have gone to bed. That's what it says literally, of course. I've got my future perfect here. Iero, I will have gone. Okay? And I've got it contrasted against a regular future. They will bite. But here's the thing. Even though I can say this literally, and it does make sense to say, my cats will bite my feet when I will have gone to bed, that's not usually what we actually say in English. What we usually say is, my cats will bite my feet when I've gone to bed, or when I go to bed. That's usually what we say instead. We usually just throw in a present or a present perfect or something like that. And we don't bother with the will have. Because we just don't use this tense very much in English. We don't need to, or at least we don't feel like we need to. And if you have a sentence like this one, where you can translate it without the will have and it all still makes sense and your other verb is still in the future, that's fine. I'm not going to call you out on it. Now, if you do want to be as literal as possible to make sure you're understanding, then yeah, throw your will have into whatever future perfect tense verb you have. But if you can make sense of it without it, that's honestly fine. A lot of the examples you're going to see when you do your homework are actually going to be conditional sentences like this one, where you have an if or an unless in there, a see or an easy. And again, you can see I've got my future perfect, I keep misspeaking, my future perfect tense verb here. And then I'm contrasting that against actually two futures. But what this one says is, if I will have given the cats a lot of food, then they will not bite my feet, and Luke will vomit. But again, I don't really need to say the will have with detero, even though it literally is, I will have given. In, more colloquial English, what we would actually say is just, if I give. If I give my cats a lot of food, then they won't bite my feet, and Luke will vomit. It doesn't affect how I'm translating my future tense verbs. I'm still saying will and won't with those. I just clipped out the will have and treated it like it was present, even though it's not really present. It's actually future perfect, so that it is expressing that it hasn't happened yet, but it will have before these. Okay? So that is what is probably going to be your least favorite tense. I assume it is for most people. But hey, the good news is you're not going to see it very much. So nevertheless, do learn it. And of course, as always, ask me if you have questions, and I will talk to you wonderful people later. Bye.